Spelunking is the technical name for cave exploration. This is the last leg of our spelunking through Plato. We're going into the cave, into the myth of the cave itself. If you haven't traveled with us this far, you're still welcome to go. We're going to be talking philosophy. We've reached the point where I will explain why we call this spelunking through Plato. The cave. The myth of the cave is probably the most common taught part of all of Plato's writing, with the possible exception of Socrates' Apology. In the myth of the cave, we reach the climax, if you will, of Plato's attempt to explain why the philosopher is the only person truly suited to rule the ideal, just state. We've already been through the parable of the sun, where we talk about how just as the sun makes vision possible in the eye, so too does the form of the good make vision possible in the mind. In the divided line analogy, he shows us what parts of knowledge each illuminator illuminates, and therefore which one has truth and reality, and which one illuminates only illusion and conjecture. With the myth of the cave, he tries to bring all of this together and make it comprehensible. Plato asks us to understand the normal intellectual life of a human being as though we were in a cave. We are in a cave, we are in a seat, we are locked in that seat. We cannot turn our heads left or right. All we can do is look straight ahead. And ahead of us, we seem to see reality. It's sort of fuzzy, it's sort of dark, but it's what there is. And that's all we know. He asks us then to imagine, what if all of a sudden the clamps that hold you in place are free, and now you can turn your head left and right. You can see that there's everybody else locked in place like you are, and you can get up from your seat. So when you get up from your seat, you discover that these are just shadows on the wall. You can see the irregularity of them in a way you weren't really aware of it before. So you turn around, and behind you, you see that there is a row of candles, and in front of the row of candles, there's little figures on sticks, sort of a stick puppet arrangement, so that you're having the shadow of the stick cast on the wall, and that's what you have thought was reality all this time. So, in the cave, we have only the light of candles. What we are accustomed to thinking of as reality is nothing but shadows from stick puppets. No reality here really to speak of at all. No truth here at all. You have representations and representations of representations. You have clumsy stick puppets and you have fuzzy shadows on a wall. And that is the life of the average person. Our freed human being is able then to walk out the cave, and at the top of the cave emerges into the sunlight. Now in the sunlight his eyes hurt. His mind is reeling. He cannot deal with what he is seeing. In the cave there were almost no colors. In the outside world, color everywhere. On the inside, everything is fuzzy and shady. On the outside, everything is sharp and clear. And let's get clear, by the way. I think Plato has made this analogy shaped the way it is for a very important reason. He wants to say that the normal person is living in an enclosed, locked-in bubble of a life. The philosopher, through the educational process of anamnesis, the remembering, that process of recalling what we already know, the philosopher succeeds in getting free of that narrow, parochial, dark vision of the world and is able to process out. Now, going out is hard. As I say, it hurts your eyes, it hurts your mind. A lot of people will, having seen that, turn and go right back in. That was comfortable. I could deal with that. That was okay for me. But some people will stay. And some people will get used to looking at the objects of reality. Now, these are those abstractions, those universal principles. They're not yet the forms. To see the forms, we have to have that same realization that we had regarding vision back in the parable of the sun. The sun illuminates what we see. The sun makes vision possible. So we must learn to look at the sun. And if we can bring ourselves to look up and look at the sun, again, it hurts a lot. For many people, it will blind them. But for some, for the philosopher, for the person who is true to the form of the good, the other forms will emerge. You will see them up there. The form of the good will make them clear to you. This is what we've already seen in the divided line. He's just trying to make it more dramatic and more graphic. We, at each level, have to process through a change, a truly bewildering change. Oh my God, I was locked in a seat all this time. Who knew? Oh my God, everything I've looked at forever is just shadows. Oh my God, and those shadows are produced by cheap shadow puppets. They're not even good-looking things. Oh my God, the light. I can't take the light. Can't take the truth. Famously, one of Plato's greatest enemies, Nietzsche, asked the question, can human life actually coexist with the truth? And even Plato said, it's hard. It's easier to go back in the cave, go back in the dark, live among the shadows. But for those who can come out, there is wisdom. The lower wisdom of math and science, and the higher wisdom of philosophy, the forms themselves, the truth itself, perfection itself. How do we get there? Through reflection, through inwardness. Plato does not want to send us off to examine the universe in its four corners. Plato wants us to look inside. Why? Well, as we've already seen illustrated when we looked at the slave boy from Minnow. All we're doing when we learn is we're unforgetting. We're unremembering. And very near the end of the Republic, Plato explains how it is that we have forgotten. Near the end of the Republic, Plato makes his interlocutors ask Socrates, where do we learn this stuff? I mean, if we look inward, and that's where we find it, if that's what our learning is about in this life, how did that information get there? Where did we come to understand the forms? And Plato tells the story of I'm sorry, it was a cheap joke. Is a warrior who's killed in battle. After the battle, he lies dead on the field for several days. He's finally found by his fellow warriors, and they bring him home to burn him, as you do, on the funeral pyre. But just before the fire is lit, sits up and tells a story. This is the story tells. He says that when he died, he was taken away to another place. And in that place, he spent several days with many, many other people. And he saw that the people who had come before him had either gone up or down. And he himself was in line to go either up or down. But they pulled him aside and said, no, we're sending you back right now so that others can learn from you. So he watched what happened. Some went up, some went down. Some came from up, some came from down. What had happened, of course, is that those who had gone up had seen one sort of experience of the world, and those who had gone down had seen another sort of experience of the world. And each was put into their proper understanding, if you will, by the experiences they had in this afterlife. This afterlife, which is, of course, also before life, because if is going back, so is everyone else. Plato accepted the idea of reincarnation. Now, this is interesting. He certainly does not let Socrates talk about reincarnation in the Apology. Socrates offers two options for what happens after death. Either he will be amongst those who have died before, where he can go on asking his questions just as merrily as he always has, or alternatively, it is a sleep, a late, deep, lasting sleep. Never enters into Socrates' head, his real head, not the one of this artificial Socrates being used as a puppet in the Republic. Socrates, the puppet, teaches reincarnation. He says the soul, when it's in this other world, when it's in this other life, the soul has a direct interaction with the forms, the direct interaction with pure reality. Everything that we need to know is given to us in our pure state before birth or after death, depending on how you want to look at it. Having learned all this, suddenly is being sent back. And being sent back, for some reason, now he's going to be given the same drink of Lethe. The river Lethe is one of the 5 rivers of the underworld, which include Acheron, the river of sorrow, Cocytus, which is the river of lamentation, Phlegethon, the river of fire, and Styx, the river of hate. Styx, of course, is the famous one of which Charon, the ferryman, brings us across at the time of death. On our way out, we do drink the river of Lethe, and so doing, we forget what we already have encountered in the pre-life that's the afterlife, that's the next life lining up. And so when we get here, we've forgotten, and we now need to unforget. Returns to the living and tells all this to his friends and colleagues. And this idea is Plato's notion of how we begin our life with certain innate ideas that we can uncover through the process of anamnesis. Now, let's take a look at this and get some of the things people have drawn from it. First of all, this is a defense of the position of rationalism. Rationalism, as opposed to empiricism, holds that everything we know through reason. You don't need experience. It is interesting, however, that in order to explain the presence of these ideas in our minds, we have to encounter them in another life in the way we would normally encounter things in this life and extrapolate from them. Okay, so it's not the strongest defense that exists. But it also gives us this idea of an immortal soul. I am told by those who are supposed to know, I don't know, I'm just told this, that the traditional Jewish view, that is to say, the historic Jewish view, the view actually spelled out in the Old Testament, doesn't seem to contain a real idea of an immortal soul. We are told we will die when we improperly partake of the fruit of the tree of good and evil. It isn't said, oh, you'll lose the connection between your body and your soul. You will die. And indeed, there are many passages throughout the Old Testament which are taken to suggest no immortal soul. Plato's influence is supposed to be one of the sources for the immortal soul that we see in Christianity and in more contemporary views, at least in some schools, in modern Judaism, insofar as those views influenced Islam and Islam. The idea of the form of the good is evolved into a position that sees the divine, God, the Father, figure who's identified by the Tetragrammaton, Allah. This person is the source of all goodness in this way, not by creation in the way that we would have seen, say, in Greek thinking. God's making things with their hands, not in North thinking or Roman thinking, but rather this force of power emanating from the divine, creating everything. It goes through a particular channel, Philo Judaeus. He introduces this whole idea that, for example, things are more real the closer they are to God, less real the further they get from God, more good the closer they come to God, that what it is actually to be evil is to be so distant from God as to be uninfluenced by the divine. And we see this in St. Augustine, who passes it on to some degree to St. Thomas Aquinas and right on to the current day. Now, these are not Plato's obvious points that he's trying to make, but they do follow from what he says, and they are influences in modern thinking. Less and less people are rationalists. Rationalism sort of became unpopular as empiricism had successes. Well, peace on that. We'll have a go at the relationship between those two somewhere down the road. But it also helps to shape much thinking about the self and thinking about the soul as we go forward in time from Plato's great work, The Republic. It also has an influence on what we think of as knowledge and what it is involved in knowing. As I suggested in my essay on the divided line, Plato imagines that everything is here. It's already here. It is somehow a shortcoming, a moral shortcoming to be less smart, less wise, less informed. Well, see, not informed, because everybody's equally informed. It's can you get to that information that matters. And it creates a hierarchy of people that I don't think has to be there. And it's not important because I know more than you do or you know less than I do or whatever. That's not the issue. The issue is it is a failure on my part to know less than you. as opposed to perhaps merely being that we have different shapes of brain. I mean, which can't be true for Plato, because knowledge is in the soul, which is immortal and everlasting and unchanging. You can't have an inferior soul to me. Your soul is the same as my soul. All souls are the same. Mine has been shaped by different, but I can't even say that, see, because we've all had basically the same experience. But he does, in his account in the myth of talk about people who've had one sort of life, a bad sort of life, an unpleasant sort of life, and those who've had a higher form of life. And he remarked that it's interesting how the people who have had the higher form often want to continue to be people of power, whereas persons who come from a lower situation often want to retreat to the world of the animal. Yes, animal. Plato sees animals as having souls, and he says animals most often want to become people. People, especially those who've had a hard time as a human being, want to become animals. Most interestingly, I guess, is the story he tells of Odysseus, that most wily of men, that great leader of the Achaeans. Odysseus wants to be a human because it's better to be a human, but he wants to be an extraordinary human. He wants to be a normal Joe who leads a life that no one notices. On the one hand, I like that. It says that our life, the normal life, the average life, is the life that the wisest person would choose. On the other hand, he treats it as if it's somewhat freakish, that no one would ever really do that, that it took someone who had already had an extraordinary life, like Odysseus, in order to choose a normal life, an average life. Plato's three-part trip that we've made is illustrative of this view that all knowledge, all reality is essentially internal. We discover the world not through exploration of it, but rather through introspection about our own lives and our own affairs. I leave it to you whether you like Plato's arguments or whether you don't. I hope now you have a better grasp of them and understand why they're important to understanding so much of human historical thought. Now that you've seen one of our episodes, we hope you'll return and keep talking philosophy. The easiest way to do that is by subscribing. You'll be notified of when new episodes appear, and you'll have a bookmark back to the already existing episodes. This video is produced under the patronage of George Hales, our executive producer, and courtesy of Andrew Beeman Cavallaro, our producer. If you want to become part of our support team, please go to www.patreon.com/talkingphilosophy for more information. We'd also like to give a shout out to our friends of the channel. If you have watched at least 5 videos from this channel, please let me know in the comments section, and I will be glad to list you as a friend of the channel. Just give me the name you'd like to be listed under. Thank you again for watching this video, and keep talking philosophy.